The day my own family told me I was too old to contribute anything meaningful was the day I realized I'd spent 72 years living for everyone else's approval. I was standing in the conference room of Henderson Family Hardware, the business my late husband Frank and I had built from nothing 45 years ago, watching my son David shuffle papers nervously while my daughter-in-law Patricia smirked from across the mahogany table. My youngest, Jennifer, wouldn't even make eye contact. "Mom, you have to understand," David said, his voice taking on that patronizing tone I'd grown to despise. "The business world has changed. Online sales, social media marketing, inventory management systems, it's all digital now. At your age, it's time to step back and let the younger generation take over." Patricia leaned forward, her manicured nails clicking against the table. "What David's trying to say, Sarah, is that we appreciate everything you and Frank built here. But running a hardware store in 2023 requires skills that, frankly, someone from your generation just doesn't possess." I felt something crack inside my chest. Not my heart, but something deeper. My resolve, maybe. Or perhaps it was the last thread of respect I'd held for these people who shared my blood but had forgotten where they came from. "I've been managing this store's books, inventory, and customer relationships since before you were born, Patricia," I said quietly. "I built the customer database you're so proud of. I negotiated our supplier contracts. That was then, Mom." Jennifer finally spoke up, her voice sharp with impatience. "This is now. We need someone who understands technology, who can connect with younger customers. Someone who isn't." She gestured vaguely at me, as if my age were something visible and shameful. "Someone who isn't what, Jennifer?" "Someone who isn't stuck in the past." The room fell silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. I looked around at these three people: my son, who I'd carried for 9 months and raised with more love than I knew I possessed; my daughter, who I'd held through countless nightmares and celebrated through every achievement; and my daughter-in-law, who I'd welcomed into our family with open arms despite my initial reservations. "I see," I said, standing up slowly. Not because I was frail, despite what they seemed to think, but because I needed a moment to process what was happening. "So the woman who increased this store's revenue by 30% last year is suddenly incompetent because she had the audacity to turn 72? David's face reddened. "It's not about competence, Mom. It's about adaptation. The customers want to deal with people who understand their world." "You mean people who look like them?" I said. "Younger people." "That's not what we're saying," Patricia interrupted, though her expression suggested it was exactly what they were saying. "We're talking about stepping into a consulting role. You'd still be involved, just not in day-to-day operations." I'd heard this song before. A consulting role was corporate speak for being shuffled off to the side until people forgot you existed. I'd watched it happen to Frank's business partner, Harold, 20 years ago. They'd given him an office in the back, asked his opinion on things they'd already decided, and slowly stopped asking altogether. He died 3 years later. Not from illness but from the crushing realization that he was no longer needed. And who exactly would be taking over my responsibilities? I asked, though I already knew the answer. "We've discussed it," David said, glancing at Patricia for support. "Patricia has her MBA, and she's been developing some innovative strategies for modernizing our approach. She'd be perfect for general manager." Of course, Patricia, who had never worked a day in retail until she married my son. Patricia, who thought customer service meant smiling, while she counted the minutes until closing time. Patricia, who had spent the last 5 years making subtle comments about how outdated our methods were, how we needed to pivot to a more contemporary business model. I thought about Frank then, about how we'd started this store in 1978 with nothing but a $5,000 loan and absolute faith in each other. I remembered the 18-hour days we'd worked during those early years, how we'd learned every aspect of the business by doing it ourselves. Frank had passed away 8 years ago, leaving me not just his share of the business, but his unwavering belief that hard work and genuine care for customers were the only strategies that mattered. "What about the staff?" I asked. "Maria's been with us for 15 years. Tom's been here almost as long. What happens to them in Patricia's brave new world?" Patricia's smile tightened. "Well, we'll need to evaluate everyone's performance and efficiency. Some changes might be necessary." There it was. Not just me, but the people who'd become like family to me over the years. Maria, who knew every customer by name and could recommend the exact screw or tool they needed without even looking it up. Tom, who'd taught countless teenagers their first job skills and still sent Christmas cards to kids who'd worked for us decades ago. They were all expendable in Patricia's vision of a modernized Henderson family hardware. I need some time to think about this, I said, gathering my purse from the chair. Of course, Mom, David said, relief evident in his voice. Take all the time you need. We know this is a big transition. As I walked out of that conference room, I could hear Patricia's voice behind me. I think she took that better than expected. We should be able to implement the changes by next month. I drove home in a daze, my hands trembling as I gripped the steering wheel. 45 years of my life, dismissed in a 30-minute meeting. Not because I was incompetent, not because the store was failing under my management, but because I'd committed the unforgivable sin of aging. My house felt different when I walked through the front door. Quieter somehow. Frank's favorite chair still sat in the living room corner, and I found myself sinking into it, staring at the family photos that covered the mantel. Pictures of David and Jennifer as children, graduation photos, wedding pictures, grandchildren I barely saw because I was too old to keep up with their active lifestyles. When had I become the burden? When had my experience transformed from valuable wisdom into obsolete knowledge? I sat there for hours replaying the meeting in my mind. Patricia's condescending smile. David's uncomfortable fidgeting. Jennifer's obvious impatience with what she clearly saw as a formality. They'd already decided my fate before I'd even walked into that room. The meeting had been theater, a performance designed to make them feel better about what they'd already chosen to do. But something else was stirring inside me. Something I hadn't felt in years. Anger, yes, but also something more powerful. Determination. The same feeling I'd had in 1978 when Frank and I had decided to risk everything on a dream that everyone said was too ambitious for a young couple with no business experience. I thought about Maria, who'd been more than an employee. She'd been my right hand, my confidant, my friend. She was only 58. But I knew Patricia would see her as another relic from the old guard. Tom was 61 and had planned to work until retirement. How many people's lives were about to be disrupted? Because my family had decided that youth was more valuable than knowledge. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about something Frank used to say. Sarah, the day you stop believing in yourself is the day you actually become old. He'd said it during one of our toughest years, when the big box stores had moved into town and everyone predicted the death of small hardware stores. We'd proven them wrong then by focusing on what we did best. Personal service, expert advice, and genuine care for our customers' needs. Maybe it was time to prove them wrong again. The next morning I called in sick for the first time in 5 years. Instead of going to the store, I drove downtown to the small business district where Frank and I had started our journey. The neighborhood had changed over the decades, but there was still something magical about it. Young entrepreneurs, artists, families who valued community over convenience. And there, on the corner of Pine and 3rd Street, was a small storefront with a for lease sign in the window. I parked across the street and stared at it for 20 minutes, my heart pounding with a possibility I hadn't allowed myself to consider. The space was perfect. Large front windows for displays, enough room for a real hardware department, and a location right in the heart of a community that would appreciate personal service. I thought about the customers I'd built relationships with over the years, the weekend warriors who needed advice on their projects, the elderly folks who couldn't navigate the intimidating aisles of the big box stores, the young families who wanted to support local businesses. I pulled out my phone and called the number on the lease sign. Peterson Properties, this is Mike. Hello. I'm interested in the storefront on Pine Street. The one that's for lease. Oh, that's a great space. Are you looking to open a business? I hesitated for just a moment. Yes. A hardware store. Perfect. That area could really use a good hardware store. When would you like to see it? How about today? Mike Peterson was a pleasant man in his 40s who met me at the storefront that afternoon. As he unlocked the door, he chatted about the neighborhood's potential, the foot traffic, the other businesses that were thriving in the area. The space was even better than it had looked from outside. Solid hardwood floors, high ceilings, and excellent natural light. I could already envision where the tool displays would go, where I'd put the advice counter, how I'd organize everything for maximum efficiency and customer comfort. The previous tenant was a gift shop, Mike explained. Nice lady, but she retired last year. Are you planning to run this yourself? That's the plan, I said, running my hand along the worn wooden counter. I've been in the hardware business for over 40 years. Wow, that's impressive. You must know the industry inside and out. I like to think so. We talked about lease terms, startup timelines, and the practical aspects of opening a new store. Mike was enthusiastic about having an experienced business owner in the space, and by the time I left, I'd scheduled a follow-up meeting for the next day. Driving home, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Excitement. Pure, energizing excitement about the future instead of dread about being pushed aside. For the first time since Frank's death, I had something that belonged entirely to me, something no one could take away or diminish with their patronizing concern about my age. But I wasn't naive. Starting a business at 72 would be challenging in ways I'd never faced before. I'd need capital, suppliers, inventory, insurance, employees. I'd need to create everything from scratch while competing not just with the big box stores, but potentially with Henderson Family Hardware itself. The thought should have been daunting. Instead, it was exhilarating. That evening, I sat down at my kitchen table with a legal pad and started making lists. Everything I'd need, everyone I'd need to contact, every decision that would need to be made. I worked until past midnight, and for the first time in months, I slept peacefully. The next morning, I called the store and told David I needed to take a few personal days. He sounded concerned, probably worried that I was having some kind of breakdown from the stress of our transition discussion. Are you feeling all right, Mom? Do you need me to come over? I'm fine, David. I just have some things I need to take care of. What kind of things? If this is about yesterday, we can talk more. It's not about yesterday, I interrupted. Well, not directly. I just need some time to handle some personal business. Okay. But promise me you'll call if you need anything? The concern in his voice was genuine, which made everything more complicated. David wasn't a bad person. He'd been raised to respect his elders, to value family, to work hard. But somewhere along the way, he'd absorbed the idea that age was a liability, that experience was less valuable than adaptability, that making room for the new meant discarding the old. I promise, I told him, and meant it. Whatever happened, I didn't want to burn bridges with my children. I wanted to build something that would make them proud, even if they couldn't see its value right now. My first stop was the bank. I'd been with Midwest Community Bank for 30 years, and my relationship manager, Carol Hughes, had helped Frank and me through every major financial decision since the mid-90s. Sarah. Carol stood up as I entered her office, her smile warm and genuine. What brings you in today? How are David and Jennifer doing with the store? Carol was in her early 50s, old enough to understand the value of experience but young enough to appreciate innovation. If anyone would give me an honest assessment of my business plan, it would be her. Actually, Carol, I'm here to discuss a new venture. Something completely separate from Henderson Family Hardware. Her eyebrows rose slightly, but she maintained her professional composure. I'm intrigued. Please sit down and tell me more. I spent the next hour outlining my plan. Carol listened without interruption, taking notes and occasionally nodding. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and studied me carefully. Sarah, I have to ask, does your family know about this? Not yet. I wanted to make sure it was feasible before I mentioned it to anyone. And if they object? If they see this as competition with Henderson Family Hardware? It was a fair question, one I'd been wrestling with myself. Carol, they've made it clear that they don't value my contributions to the family business. They want me to step into a meaningless consulting role, while they implement changes that I fundamentally disagree with. I can either accept that and spend my remaining years feeling useless, or I can take control of my own future. Carol nodded slowly. From a financial perspective, your plan is solid. You have the capital, the experience, and frankly, the market research. The downtown area has been revitalizing, and there's definitely room for a specialized hardware store that focuses on personal service. The big question is whether you're prepared for the challenges of starting over at this stage of your life. What do you mean? I mean the physical demands, the stress, the long hours. You're not 25 anymore, Sarah. None of us are. I'd expected this reaction, but it still stung. Carol, I've been working 60-hour weeks for the past 45 years. I know every aspect of running a hardware store. I have relationships with suppliers, experience with inventory management, and a customer base that trusts my judgment. The only thing that's changed is my age. That's not entirely true though, is it? Technology has changed. Customer expectations have changed. The retail landscape is completely different than it was when you and Frank started. Of course it's different, but the fundamentals haven't changed. People still need tools. They still need advice. They still want to support businesses that treat them as individuals rather than transaction numbers. Carol smiled. You know what? You're absolutely right. And if anyone can make this work, it's you. Let's talk about loan options. We spent another hour discussing financial structures, loan terms, and timeline requirements. By the time I left the bank, I had pre-approval for a small business loan and a detailed plan for funding my new venture. My next stop was the storefront to meet with Mike Peterson again. This time, I came prepared with specific questions about utilities, zoning requirements, renovation possibilities, and lease terms. Mike was even more enthusiastic than he'd been the day before. I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, he said as we walked through the space again. This location would be perfect for a hardware store. The demographic is ideal. Young families, older residents, people who value quality and service over convenience. What about parking? Street parking plus a small lot behind the building. Not as much as the suburban locations, but adequate for a neighborhood store. We talked about improvements I'd want to make, timeline for occupancy, and the practical details of setting up utilities and business licenses. By the end of our meeting, I had a signed letter of intent and a move-in date 6 weeks away. 6 weeks to completely transform my life. That afternoon I started making phone calls. First to my insurance agent, then to my accountant, then to the suppliers I'd worked with for decades. Each conversation followed a similar pattern. Initial surprise, followed by enthusiasm and offers of support. Sarah, this is fantastic, said Jim Morrison from Morrison Building Supply. I've been wondering when you were going to break out on your own. Frank always said you had the best business instincts of anyone he knew. You're sure about the supplier relationships? I don't want to create problems with Henderson Family Hardware. Sarah, you've been my primary contact there for 20 years. David's a nice kid, but you're the one who knows our business. I'd rather work with someone I trust than someone who's still learning the ropes. Similar conversations with electrical suppliers, tool manufacturers, and specialty vendors gave me confidence that I'd be able to stock my store competitively. Better than competitively, actually, because I had relationships that couldn't be replicated overnight. By the end of the week, I had a business license application in process, a lease signed, suppliers lined up, and a detailed timeline for opening. I also had a name, Sarah's Hardware and Home Solutions. Simple, personal, and clear about what I offered. But I still hadn't told my family. That changed on Friday evening when David called to check on me. Mom, you've been out all week. Are you feeling okay? Jennifer's worried that you're upset about our discussion on Monday. I'm not upset, David. Actually, I'm energized. Energized? What do you mean? I took a deep breath. I mean, I've decided to start my own hardware store. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for so long that I wondered if the call had dropped. Mom? Did you say you're starting your own hardware store? That's right. Sarah's Hardware and Home Solutions. I'll be opening in 6 weeks. Another long pause. Mom, this isn't. I mean, you can't be serious. At your age, starting a new business. It's not realistic. There it was again. My age wielded like a weapon against my ambitions. David, I've been in the hardware business since before you were born. I know what I'm doing. But competing with us? With the family business. I'm not competing with anyone. I'm pursuing an opportunity to use my experience and skills in a way that fulfills me. If you see that as competition, maybe you should ask yourself why. Mom, this is crazy. Have you thought about the stress? The physical demands? What if you get sick? What if the business fails? What if it succeeds? He couldn't answer that, because success would prove everything they'd said about my capabilities was wrong. I think you should reconsider this, he said finally. Maybe we can work something out at Henderson. Maybe there's a middle ground. David, I've already signed the lease. I've arranged financing. I've lined up suppliers. This isn't a whim or an emotional reaction. This is a business decision made by someone with 45 years of experience in the industry. Does Jennifer know? You can tell her if you'd like. I'm not hiding anything from anyone. After I hung up, I felt drained but not defeated. I'd known this conversation was coming, and I'd prepared myself for their reaction. What I hadn't prepared for was how liberating it would feel to finally take control of my own narrative. Within an hour, my phone rang again. Jennifer. Mom, David told me about your plan. I think we need to talk. What would you like to talk about, honey? About how this is going to affect the family. About how it's going to look to our customers, our suppliers, our community. About how it's going to impact Henderson Family Hardware. Jennifer. I spent 45 years building Henderson Family Hardware. Every relationship, every system, every process that made it successful, I was part of creating that. Now you're telling me I'm too old to contribute, too obsolete to be useful. So I'm finding a place where my contributions are valued. But why does it have to be another hardware store? Why can't you start a different kind of business? Because hardware is what I know. It's what I'm good at. It's what I love. Mom, you're 72 years old. Do you really think you can handle the physical demands of running a store? The long hours, the heavy lifting, the stress. I thought about Maria, who'd been doing exactly that for 15 years. I thought about Tom, who came in early and stayed late because he took pride in his work. I thought about myself, still working 60-hour weeks at an age when most people were fully retired. Jennifer, I handled those demands when I was building Henderson Family Hardware from nothing. I handled them when your father got sick and I had to run everything myself for 6 months. I handled them last year when we had our best revenue year ever. My age hasn't changed my capabilities. But what if something happens to you? What if you have a heart attack or fall and break a hip? Who's going to run the store then? The same thing that would happen to any business owner. I'll deal with those challenges if and when they arise. I'm not going to limit my life based on hypothetical disasters. Jennifer sighed. This is going to hurt the family business, Mom. You know that, right? You're taking your experience and your relationships and using them against us. I'm using them to build something positive. If you see that as against you, maybe you should examine your own motivations. The call ended less pleasantly than the one with David, but I'd expected that too. Jennifer had always been more direct than her brother, more willing to say what she really thought. In this case, what she really thought was that my success would be their failure, which revealed more about their confidence in their own abilities than it did about my prospects. Over the weekend, I drove out to visit my sister Margaret, who lived about an hour away. At 75, Margaret had been retired for over a decade and spent her time gardening, volunteering, and spoiling her grandchildren. She was everything my family thought I should be. Quietly settled, gratefully inactive, content to fade into the background of other people's lives. Sarah. She greeted me at the door with her usual enthusiasm. What a wonderful surprise. Come in, I'll make coffee. Margaret's kitchen was warm and inviting, filled with family photos and the smell of fresh bread. As we settled at her table with our coffee, I told her about everything that had happened over the past week. Margaret listened without interruption, her expression shifting from surprise to concern to something that looked like admiration. 72 and starting a new business, she said when I finished. Sarah, you've got more courage than I ever had. It's not about courage, Margaret. It's about not being ready to disappear just because other people think I should. Have you considered that they might be right, though? About the challenges, I mean. Running a business is exhausting work. More exhausting than spending the rest of my life feeling useless? More exhausting than watching someone else destroy everything Frank and I built. Margaret reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Frank would be so proud of you. That simple statement brought tears to my eyes. Frank had been my partner in everything, my greatest supporter and most trusted advisor. In the 8 years since his death, I tried to honor his memory by continuing the work we'd started together. But our children saw that work as a relic, something to be updated and improved rather than respected and preserved. Do you really think so? I asked. I know so. He always said you were the brains behind Henderson Family Hardware. He was good with people, but you were the one who understood the business inside and out. The children don't see it that way. The children are scared, Sarah. They're afraid of change, afraid of responsibility, afraid of not measuring up to what you and Frank accomplished. It's easier to push you aside than to work alongside you and risk the comparison. Margaret's insight was probably more accurate than I wanted to admit. David and Jennifer weren't evil people. They were insecure people who'd grown up in the shadow of a successful family business and never quite figured out how to make it their own. What do you think I should do? Exactly what you're doing. Show them that age doesn't mean obsolete, that experience has value, that you're not ready to be dismissed just because you've accumulated a few decades. I drove home feeling more confident than I had since this whole process started. Margaret was right. This wasn't just about starting a business. It was about proving that I still had value, still had something to contribute, still had dreams worth pursuing. The following week, I threw myself into the practical aspects of opening Sarah's Hardware and Home Solutions. I hired a contractor to make necessary improvements to the space, ordered shelving and fixtures, began the process of setting up accounts with suppliers, and started developing my inventory strategy. Each day brought new challenges and new confirmations that I'd made the right decision. When I met with the contractor, he treated me as a knowledgeable business owner, not a confused elderly woman. When I spoke with suppliers, they were eager to work with me because they knew I understood their products and their customers. When I walked through the downtown area, other business owners welcomed me warmly and offered advice and support. The contrast with how my own family had treated me was stark and painful. 2 weeks into the process, Patricia showed up at my house unannounced. "Sarah, we need to talk," she said when I opened the front door. "Come in, Patricia. Would you like some coffee? This isn't a social visit." She followed me into the living room but remained standing, her posture aggressive and defensive. "This hardware store idea of yours is causing problems." "What kind of problems?" "David's been distracted and upset ever since you told him about it. Jennifer's worried about how it's going to affect family relationships. And frankly, I'm concerned about how it's going to impact Henderson Family Hardware." I gestured toward the couch. "Please sit down. Let's discuss this like adults." Patricia sat reluctantly, perching on the edge of the cushion as if she planned to leave quickly. "Patricia, help me understand something. A week and a half ago, you told me I was too old to contribute meaningfully to Henderson Family Hardware. You said I didn't have the skills necessary to manage a modern retail business. Now you're concerned that my new business might be too successful. That's not. You're twisting what I said." "Am I? Because it seems like you can't have it both ways. Either I'm a competent business owner who poses a competitive threat, or I'm an obsolete relic who should step aside gracefully. Which is it?" Patricia's face reddened. "You're being deliberately difficult. This isn't about your competence. It's about loyalty to the family." "Loyalty?" The word came out sharper than I'd intended. "Patricia, where was the loyalty when you decided I was too old to continue in my role? Where was the loyalty when you planned to evaluate employees who've been with us for decades? Where was the loyalty when you called a meeting to discuss my future without including me in the planning? We included you in the meeting. You included me in the announcement. The decision had already been made." Patricia stood up, clearly frustrated. "Look, Sarah, I didn't come here to rehash old arguments. I came here to find a solution that works for everyone. I'm listening. What if we offered you a more substantial role at Henderson? Not just consulting, but active participation in decision-making. We could create a position that uses your experience, while still allowing for necessary modernization." It was a reasonable offer, probably more reasonable than I'd expected from Patricia. But it was also exactly what I'd feared. A desperate attempt to control the narrative and limit my options. "What kind of position?" I asked. "Senior advisor. You'd have input on major decisions, oversight of vendor relationships, responsibility for staff development. Real authority, not just busy work." "And who would I report to?" Patricia hesitated. "Well, as general manager, I'd be coordinating operations, but your role would be more strategic. So I'd report to you. In an organizational sense, yes, but it wouldn't be a traditional reporting relationship. More like a partnership." I almost laughed. Patricia was offering me the chance to work for her, To have my decades of experience filtered through her MBA theories and contemporary business strategies. It was a generous offer compared to the consulting role they'd originally suggested, but it was still fundamentally about control. Patricia, I appreciate the offer. I really do. But I've already committed to opening my own store. You could back out. Tell people you've reconsidered, that you've decided to focus your energy on the family business instead. And what happens to the lease I've signed? The suppliers I've contacted? The contractors who are already working on improvements? Those are just business details. They can be resolved. No, Patricia. They're not just business details. They're commitments I've made to people who are counting on me. They're investments in a future I've chosen for myself. They're proof that I'm still capable of making and following through on important decisions. Patricia stared at me for a long moment. You're really going to do this, aren't you? You're going to compete with your own family. I'm going to build a business that reflects my values and uses my skills. If you see that as competition, maybe you should ask yourself why. After Patricia left, I called my contractor to check on the progress of the store improvements. The work was ahead of schedule, and he expected to be finished by the end of the week. My shelving would arrive on Monday, and I'd already scheduled the first delivery of inventory for the following Wednesday. Everything was falling into place, but I felt oddly melancholy. I'd spent my entire adult life trying to build something that would benefit my family, something they could be proud of and build upon. Instead, I was striking out on my own at an age when most people were winding down their careers. But that melancholy was mixed with something else. Anticipation. For the first time in years, I was excited about going to work. I was excited about the challenges ahead, about proving myself in a new environment, about building something that belonged entirely to me. The weekend before my store opening, I drove out to the cemetery where Frank was buried. I'd gotten into the habit of visiting him whenever I had major decisions to make, not because I believed he could hear me, but because talking to him helped me organize my thoughts. Well, Frank, I said, settling onto the small bench beside his headstone, I'm about to do something you probably wouldn't have recommended. I'm starting over at 72. The cemetery was quiet except for the sound of wind through the oak trees Frank had always loved. I told him about the meeting with David, Jennifer, and Patricia, about their assumption that I was no longer capable of contributing meaningfully to the business we'd built together. They're not bad people, I said. They're just scared. Scared of change, scared of responsibility, scared of not measuring up to what we accomplished. But Frank, I can't spend the rest of my life making myself smaller so they can feel bigger. I thought about all the challenges we'd faced together. The economic downturns, the competition from big box stores, the years when it seemed like small businesses were becoming extinct. We'd survived because we'd adapted, because we'd never stopped learning, because we'd never given up on our vision of what a hardware store could be. I know I'm not 25 anymore, I continued. I know there are things I don't understand about modern business, technologies I'm still learning, approaches I might not have considered. But I also know what I'm good at. I know how to treat customers with respect, how to solve problems, how to build relationships that last. A young couple was walking through the cemetery, holding hands and reading headstones. They reminded me of Frank and myself 45 years ago. Full of dreams, full of energy, full of absolute confidence that love and hard work could overcome any obstacle. I'd had that confidence once. Somewhere along the way, I'd let other people's doubts become my own, let their vision of my limitations become my reality. But starting this store was helping me remember who I used to be, who I could still be. I think you'd like the space, I told Frank. Good bones, plenty of natural light. Right in the heart of a community that appreciates personal service. It reminds me of our first store, remember? Before we got so focused on competing with the chain stores that we forgot what made us special in the first place. The following Monday, my shelving arrived and was installed. Tuesday brought the first wave of inventory. Basic tools, hardware supplies, gardening equipment, and household essentials. Wednesday brought specialty items, plumbing supplies, electrical components, and the kind of hard-to-find pieces that customers couldn't get at the big box stores. By Thursday, Sarah's Hardware and Home Solutions looked like a real store. I'd hired 2 employees, Maria, who'd accepted my offer immediately when I'd called her the previous week, and a young man named Jake who'd recently graduated from the local community college with a degree in business. Maria brought experience and customer relationships. Jake brought energy and technological skills that complemented my knowledge. Mrs. Henderson, Jake said as we arranged the tool displays, I have to ask, why did you decide to start a new store instead of staying with your family's business? It was a fair question, one I'd been asked by several people over the past few weeks. Jake, sometimes in life you reach a point where you have to choose between being comfortable and being fulfilled. My family's business would have been comfortable. This store gives me the chance to be fulfilled. But wasn't it scary? Starting over at this stage of your career. Terrifying, I admitted. But also exhilarating. When was the last time you did something that really scared you? Jake grinned. Probably taking this job. I've never worked for someone who had as much experience as you do. You mean someone who was as old as me? Well, yeah. But also someone who knew so much about business. It's intimidating. Jake, age brings experience, but it also brings perspective. I've made enough mistakes to know what doesn't work, which means I can focus on what does. That's not intimidating, that's valuable. Friday was our soft opening. Just for friends and family and longtime customers who'd heard about the store through word of mouth. I'd sent personal invitations to about 50 people, expecting maybe 20 to show up. By noon there were cars parked up and down Pine Street, and a line of people waiting to get into the store. Sarah, called Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman who'd been shopping at Henderson Family Hardware for 30 years. I heard you were opening your own place. I had to come see what you'd built. Mrs. Patterson, how wonderful to see you. What do you think? She looked around the store, taking in the carefully organized displays, the clear signage, the comfortable atmosphere I'd worked so hard to create. It feels like the old Henderson store, she said. Before it got so big and impersonal. This feels like a place where people know your name. That comment, more than any other, told me I'd succeeded in creating what I'd envisioned. Throughout the afternoon, customers browsed, asked questions, and made purchases. But more than that, they talked about their projects, their challenges, their satisfaction with finding a store that treated them as individuals rather than transaction numbers. Tom from Henderson Family Hardware stopped by around 4 o'clock, officially just to browse but really to check out the competition. Sarah, this is impressive, he said, examining our tool selection. You've got some items here that we don't carry anymore. Different customer base, different needs, I replied. How are things at Henderson? Tom's expression grew cautious. Different. Patricia's implementing a lot of changes. New computer systems, different supplier relationships, modified store layout. Some of the customers are adjusting. And the staff also adjusting. Maria's replacement is learning, but she doesn't have Maria's experience with customers. And Patricia let go of 2 part-time employees last week. Said we needed to improve efficiency. I felt a pang of sadness for the store Frank and I had built, for the culture we'd worked so hard to create. But I also felt validation for my decision to start fresh rather than try to reform something that had already been fundamentally changed. Tom, you know you're always welcome here if you decide you want a change of scenery. He smiled. I appreciate that, Sarah. Really. But I'm not ready to make any big moves right now. The offer stands. By the end of our soft opening day, we'd sold more merchandise than I'd projected for our entire first week. More importantly, we'd connected with customers, solved problems, and begun building the kind of relationships that would sustain the business long term. That evening, as Maria, Jake, and I cleaned up and restocked for the following day, I felt a satisfaction I hadn't experienced in years. Not just the satisfaction of a successful day, but the deeper satisfaction of work that aligned with my values and utilized my strengths. Mrs. Henderson, Jake said as he swept the floor, today was amazing. I've never seen customers so engaged, so grateful for personal attention. It's like they'd been waiting for a store like this. They had been waiting, I replied. They just didn't know it yet. Maria, who'd been organizing the cash register area, looked up with a smile. Sarah, I have to tell you something. In 15 years at Henderson, I never had a day like today. Not just the sales, but the feeling. Like we were really helping people, really making a difference. That's because we were. That's what this business is really about. Not just selling products, but providing solutions and building relationships. Our grand opening the following Saturday exceeded even my optimistic projections. Word had spread throughout the community about the soft opening, and by the time we officially opened at 8 o'clock, there were already 30 people waiting outside. Local business owners stopped by to welcome me to the neighborhood. Customers brought friends to show them what they'd discovered. The local newspaper sent a reporter to write a feature story about the new store. "Mrs. Henderson," the reporter asked, "what made you decide to open a hardware store at this stage of your life?" "I decided that my experience and knowledge were too valuable to waste," I replied. Age shouldn't disqualify someone from pursuing their dreams or contributing to their community. "Were you nervous about competing with established stores in the area?" "I'm not really competing with anyone. I'm offering something different: personal service, expert advice, and genuine care for customers' needs. If that's competitive, then I suppose established stores should be nervous about what they're not providing." The story ran in Tuesday's paper with the headline, "Local Woman Proves Age is Just a Number with New Hardware Store." The article included quotes from customers praising the store's atmosphere, selection, and service, as well as my comments about the value of experience in business. David called me that evening. "Mom, I saw the newspaper article. Congratulations on your opening." "Thank you, David. That means a lot coming from you." I have to admit, I was skeptical about this whole venture. But seeing how successful your first week has been, maybe I was wrong about some things. It wasn't a full apology, but it was more acknowledgement than I'd expected. "David, I didn't do this to prove you wrong. I did it to prove to myself that I still had something valuable to offer. I know that now. And Mom, I'm proud of you. What you've accomplished in just a few weeks is remarkable." "What about Jennifer and Patricia? How do they feel about the newspaper article?" "They're processing it. Patricia especially. I think she's beginning to realize that your success reflects some shortcomings in our approach at Henderson." "David, I hope you understand that I never wanted to hurt the family business. I just wanted to continue contributing to the industry I love." "I understand that now. And Mom, if you ever want to talk about ways we could work together instead of separately, I'd be open to that conversation." It was an olive branch, tentative but genuine. I appreciated the gesture, even though I wasn't ready to consider any kind of partnership. Sarah's Hardware and Home Solutions was mine in a way that Henderson Family Hardware could never be again. As my second week in business progressed, I began to see patterns in my customer base. Young families appreciated the personal attention and expert advice. Older customers loved the comfortable atmosphere and the fact that I remembered their names and their projects. Professional contractors started coming in for specialty items they couldn't find elsewhere, and DIY enthusiasts discovered that I could help them avoid costly mistakes. But perhaps most satisfying were the customers who came in not just for products, but for validation. People who'd been dismissed or underestimated because of their age, their gender, or their lack of experience. People who'd been made to feel stupid for asking questions or requesting help. "Mrs. Henderson," said Janet Morrison, a widow in her 60s who was trying to maintain her home independently, "thank you for not making me feel foolish for not knowing the difference between a Phillips head and a flathead screwdriver." "Janet, there's nothing foolish about not knowing something you've never needed to know before. The foolish thing would be pretending you know it and making mistakes because you were afraid to ask." These interactions reminded me daily why I'd made the right choice. I wasn't just running a hardware store. I was creating a space where people felt valued regardless of their age, experience level, or background. 3 weeks after opening, I received an unexpected visit from Jennifer. "Mom, I owe you an apology," she said as soon as she walked through the door. I was helping a customer select paint colors, so Jennifer waited until I'd finished before approaching the counter. "What kind of apology?" "The kind where I admit I was completely wrong about your capabilities, your judgment, and your decision to open this store." Jennifer looked around the store, taking in the bustling activity, the satisfied customers, the obvious success of what I'd built. "I drove by last Saturday during your grand opening and saw the crowd. I thought maybe it was just curiosity, people wanting to see what you'd done. But I've been hearing about this place all over town. Customers are raving about the service, the selection, the atmosphere. You've created something special here." "Thank you, Jennifer. That means a lot." "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. Do Do you think we made a mistake at Henderson? With how we handled everything. It was a moment I'd been both hoping for and dreading. An opportunity to address what had happened, but also a chance to either heal the relationship or damage it further. Jennifer, I think you made the mistake of assuming that age equals incompetence, and that experience is less valuable than innovation. You forgot that the two aren't mutually exclusive, that you can have both wisdom and adaptability. You're right, and I think we're seeing the consequences of that mistake. Customer complaints have increased, employee morale has dropped, and sales are down compared to last year. What's Patricia's response to those challenges? Jennifer's expression darkened. More of the same. She's convinced that the problems are temporary, that customers just need time to adjust to the new systems and procedures. She doesn't want to consider that maybe her approach isn't working. And David's caught in the middle. He can see that things aren't going well, but he doesn't want to admit that removing you from management was a mistake. It would mean acknowledging that Patricia's entire strategy was flawed. I felt sympathy for my son, torn between loyalty to his wife and growing recognition that their approach wasn't producing the results they'd expected. Jennifer, what would you like me to say? That I'd consider coming back to Henderson? That I'd be willing to work under Patricia's management? No, Mom. I wouldn't ask you to do that. You've built something here that's entirely yours, something that reflects your values and your vision. I can see why you wouldn't want to give that up. Then what are you asking? I guess I'm asking if you think there's any way to fix what we've broken. If there's a way to incorporate what you've learned here into what we're doing at Henderson. It was an interesting question. One that suggested Jennifer was beginning to understand that business success wasn't just about efficiency and modernization, but about relationships and customer service. Jennifer, the problems at Henderson aren't just operational. They're cultural. Patricia has created an environment where efficiency is valued over relationships, where processes are more important than people. You can't fix that with minor adjustments. It requires a fundamental shift in priorities. Do you think she's capable of making that shift? I think Patricia is very good at what she does. She understands systems and procedures and metrics. But she doesn't understand people. She doesn't understand that customers want to feel valued, that employees want to feel respected, that success isn't just measured in profit margins. Jennifer nodded slowly. What would you do if you were in our position? I'd start by acknowledging that the current approach isn't working. Then I'd look at what successful stores like this one are doing differently. Finally, I'd make the changes necessary to rebuild the culture that made Henderson Family Hardware successful in the first place. Even if that meant admitting Patricia's strategies were wrong? Especially if that meant admitting Patricia's strategies were wrong. Jennifer, pride is expensive. It costs customers, employees, and ultimately profits. The question is whether you're willing to pay that price to avoid admitting mistakes. After Jennifer left, I found myself thinking about the conversation for the rest of the day. Part of me felt vindicated by her admission that I'd been right about the challenges they would face. But part of me felt sad that it had taken the near failure of Henderson Family Hardware for my family to recognize my value. That weekend I had lunch with Margaret again. She was eager to hear about the store's success and my reconciliation with Jennifer. So what happens now? She asked. Do you think they'll want you to come back to Henderson? Maybe. But Margaret, I don't want to go back. What I've built at Sarah's Hardware and Home Solutions is mine in a way that Henderson never could be again. I'm not ready to give that up. Even if it would heal the family relationships? Even if. Margaret, I spent 45 years trying to build something that would make my family proud. It took starting my own business to realize that I needed to build something that made me proud. And does it make you proud? I thought about the customers who thanked me for treating them with respect, the employees who looked forward to coming to work, the community that had embraced my store as a valuable addition to their neighborhood. Yes, I said. It does. As my first month in business came to a close, I realized that I'd accomplished something more significant than just opening a successful store. I'd reclaimed my sense of purpose, my confidence in my abilities, and my vision of what the hardware business could be. The financial success exceeded my projections. The customer feedback was overwhelmingly positive. The employee satisfaction was higher than I'd seen in years. But most importantly, I was excited about going to work every day, energized by the challenges and proud of what I was building. One evening, as I was closing up the store, I found a note that had been slipped under the door. Mrs. Henderson, I just wanted to thank you for treating me like a real customer instead of a bother when I came in last week with questions about my bathroom renovation. At the big box store, they acted like I was stupid for not knowing what I needed. You took the time to explain everything and helped me avoid making expensive mistakes. You saved me hundreds of dollars and made me feel capable instead of confused. Thank you for proving that good customer service still exists. It was signed by Linda Peterson, a woman in her 40s who was tackling her first major home improvement project. The note represented everything I'd hoped to accomplish with Sarah's hardware and home solutions. Treating customers with respect, sharing knowledge without condescension, and building confidence rather than highlighting ignorance. That night, I called Frank's brother Robert, who lived in California but had always been supportive of our business ventures. Robert, I wanted to let you know that I've opened my own hardware store. Sarah, that's fantastic. Tell me everything. I spent an hour describing the store, the customers, the success we'd achieved in just a month. Robert listened with the enthusiasm of someone who understood both the business and the courage it had taken to start over at 72. Frank would be so proud, he said when I finished. He always said you were the most capable person he knew. It sounds like you're proving him right. I hope so. I feel like I'm honoring his memory by continuing to do what we loved, even if I'm doing it differently. Sarah, you're not just honoring his memory. You're honoring yourself. You're proving that experience and wisdom are valuable, that age doesn't disqualify someone from pursuing their dreams. As I prepared for bed that night, I reflected on everything that had changed in just 6 weeks. I'd gone from feeling useless and dismissed to feeling valued and empowered. I transformed from someone whose family saw as a liability into someone whose community saw as an asset. But perhaps most importantly, I'd rediscovered who I was outside of other people's expectations and limitations. I wasn't just David and Jennifer's mother, or Patricia's burden, or even Frank's widow. I was Sarah Henderson, business owner, problem solver, and living proof that 72 was just the beginning of a new chapter, not the end of the story. The next morning brought a surprise visitor, Patricia. Sarah, I need to talk to you, she said, her usual confidence replaced by something that looked almost like humility. Of course, Patricia. Come in. She looked around the store with what I could only describe as professional appreciation, taking note of the layout, the customer flow, the obvious success of the operation. I owe you an apology, she said finally. Several apologies, actually. I'm listening. I was wrong about your abilities. I was wrong about what it takes to run a successful hardware store. And I was wrong to assume that age was a liability rather than an asset. Patricia sat down heavily in the chair next to my desk, looking more deflated than I'd ever seen her. Henderson Family Hardware is struggling, she continued. Customer complaints are up, employee satisfaction is down, and sales have dropped 15% since we implemented my new systems. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you? Really? Because I wouldn't blame you for feeling vindicated. It was an honest question that deserved an honest answer. Patricia, I'm sad that the store Frank and I built is struggling. I'm sad that employees who trusted me are unhappy. I'm sad that customers who supported us for decades are dissatisfied. But I'm not sorry that I chose to build something new rather than watch something I loved be destroyed. Patricia nodded. I understand now why you made that choice. What I don't understand is how you knew it would work when everyone else thought you were making a mistake. I knew it would work because I know what customers want. They want to feel valued, respected, and heard. They want to work with people who understand their needs and care about their success. All the technology and efficiency in the world can't replace genuine human connection. Could you? Would you be willing to help us figure out how to fix what we've broken? It was the question I'd been expecting but hoping I wouldn't have to answer. Patricia was essentially asking me to consult on undoing everything she'd implemented, to help her acknowledge that her entire approach had been wrong. Patricia, what kind of help are you looking for? I don't know. Advice, maybe? Insight into what we're doing wrong? Ideas for how to rebuild customer loyalty and employee satisfaction. And what would David and Jennifer think about you asking me for help? It was their idea. Well, Jennifer's idea. David agreed, but reluctantly. He's still struggling with the implications of asking for help. I thought about the irony of the situation. 6 weeks ago, they told me I was too old and obsolete to contribute to Henderson Family Hardware. Now they were asking me to help them solve problems that had resulted from dismissing my experience and knowledge. Patricia, I'm willing to offer some general observations, but I'm not interested in becoming a consultant for Henderson. I have my own business to run, and frankly, I'm not sure you're ready to hear what I'd have to say. Try me. I looked at this woman who'd been so confident in her MBA theories, so certain that youth and education were more valuable than experience and wisdom. The Patricia sitting across from me now looked tired, humbled, and genuinely willing to learn. The first thing you need to understand is that running a hardware store isn't about selling products. It's about solving problems. Customers don't come in because they need a hammer. They come in because they need to hang a picture, or fix a leaky faucet, or complete a project they've been putting off. Your job is to help them succeed. Patricia nodded, taking notes on a small pad she'd pulled from her purse. The second thing is that relationships matter more than efficiency. A customer who feels rushed or dismissed might complete their purchase, but they won't come back. A customer who feels heard and valued will not only return but will recommend you to others. But what about profit margins? Competition from big box stores? Online retailers? Patricia, those are real challenges. But they're not insurmountable if you focus on what makes you different rather than trying to compete on price and selection. You can't outconvenience the big box stores and you can't outprice online retailers. But you can outservice both of them. We talked for another hour about specific strategies, operational changes, and cultural shifts that could help Henderson Family Hardware recover from the damage of the past few months. Patricia asked thoughtful questions and seemed genuinely committed to making changes. One last thing, I said as she prepared to leave. You're going to have to rebuild trust with employees and customers. That takes time, consistency, and genuine commitment to change. It's not something you can fix with a new policy or procedure. It requires a fundamental shift in how you approach the business. I understand. And Sarah? Thank you. I know I don't deserve your help after everything I said about your capabilities. Patricia, we all make mistakes. The question is whether we're willing to learn from them. After Patricia left, I realized that helping Henderson Family Hardware succeed didn't threaten Sarah's hardware and home solutions. In fact, having 2 stores in the area that prioritize customer service and employee satisfaction would benefit the entire community. Competition didn't have to be destructive if both businesses focused on creating value, rather than destroying each other. Over the next few weeks, I heard through various sources that Patricia was implementing some of the changes we'd discussed. She'd brought back the part-time employees she'd let go, revised some of the more unpopular policies, and was making an effort to spend more time with customers instead of behind her desk. The results weren't immediate, but they were noticeable. Customer complaints decreased, employee morale improved, and sales began to recover. Meanwhile, Sarah's hardware and home solutions continued to thrive. We'd settled into a comfortable routine that maximized our strengths. My experience in customer relationships, Maria's product knowledge and community connections, and Jake's energy and technological skills. 2 months after opening, we were exceeding all of our financial projections and had established ourselves as an integral part of the downtown business community. More importantly, we'd created something that felt sustainable and fulfilling. One afternoon, as I was helping a young couple select supplies for their first home improvement project, I realized how much my perspective had changed since that devastating meeting in Henderson Family Hardware's conference room. I'd gone from seeing myself as someone whose best years were behind her to someone whose experience was just beginning to pay dividends. I transformed from feeling like a burden on my family to feeling like a valued member of my community. I'd evolved from accepting other people's limitations to creating my own possibilities. Mrs. Henderson, the young woman said as I rang up their purchases, thank you for being so patient with our questions. We had no idea what we were doing when we came in here. That's what I'm here for, I replied. Everyone starts somewhere. The important thing is that you're willing to learn and try. Do you think we can actually do this project ourselves? I think you can do anything you set your minds to. And if you run into problems, come back and we'll figure out solutions together. As they left the store, excited about their project and confident in their ability to succeed, I felt the deep satisfaction that had become a daily part of my work. I wasn't just selling products. I was building confidence, solving problems, and helping people achieve their goals. That evening, David called to give me an update on Henderson Family Hardware's progress. Mom, I wanted to thank you for the advice you gave Patricia. The changes she's made based on your suggestions have helped a lot. We're not back to where we were, but we're heading in the right direction. I'm glad to hear that, David. How are the employees adjusting? Much better. Morale has improved significantly, and we've had several long-term customers tell us they're happy with the changes. And Patricia? How is she handling the transition? She's humbled, I think. This experience has taught her a lot about the difference between managing a business and leading one. She's been asking me about some of the things you and Dad used to do, trying to understand the philosophy behind your approach. That's encouraging. Change is never easy, especially when it requires admitting that your original approach was flawed. Mom, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Do you ever regret leaving Henderson to start your own store? Do you ever wonder what might have happened if you tried to work within the system instead of striking out on your own? It was a thoughtful question, one that suggested David had been doing some serious reflection about the events of the past few months. David, I regret that our family went through a difficult period. I regret that relationships were strained and feelings were hurt. But I don't regret starting Sarah's Hardware and Home Solutions. This store has given me a sense of purpose and fulfillment that I hadn't felt in years. Even at 72? Even with all the challenges and stress. Especially at 72. David's age brought me experience, wisdom, and perspective that I couldn't have had when I was younger. Those aren't limitations, they're advantages. I'm beginning to understand that. And Mom? I'm proud of what you've accomplished. Really proud. 3 months after opening Sarah's Hardware and Home Solutions, I received a visit from the president of the Downtown Business Association, asking if I'd be interested in serving on their board of directors. Mrs. Henderson, your store has been such a positive addition to our community, said Barbara Wells, the association president. Your approach to customer service, your community involvement, and your business success make you exactly the kind of leader we need on our board. It was an honor I hadn't expected, recognition that went beyond the success of my individual store to acknowledgement of my contribution to the broader business community. I'd be honored to serve, I replied. What would my responsibilities include? Strategic planning for downtown development, coordination of community events, advocacy with city government, and mentorship for new business owners. Basically, helping to shape the future of downtown while supporting the businesses that make it special. As I left that meeting, I reflected on how dramatically my role in the community had changed. 6 months ago, I'd been seen as someone whose time had passed, whose contributions were no longer relevant. Now I was being asked to help lead the future development of the downtown business district. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, and it hadn't been without challenges. But it had proven something I'd suspected but hadn't been brave enough to act on. That age, experience, and wisdom were assets, not liabilities in the business world. 6 months after that devastating family meeting, I was not only running a successful business, but had been recognized as a community leader whose input was valued and whose experience was seen as essential for future success. That weekend, I had dinner with David, Jennifer, and their families. It was the first time we'd all been together since I'd opened the store, and I was curious about how the dynamics would play out. Mom, Jennifer said as we sat down to eat, we wanted to tell you how proud we are of what you've accomplished with your store. And how sorry we are for the way we handled things at Henderson, David added. We made assumptions about your capabilities that were completely wrong. Their children, my grandchildren, listened with interest as we talked about the challenges of starting a business, the importance of treating customers well, and the value of experience in making good decisions. Grandma, said David's oldest son, Michael, who was 15, do you think I could work at your store this summer? I'd like to learn about business. I'd love to have you, Michael, but you'll have to work hard and be willing to start at the bottom. What would I be doing? Whatever needs to be done. Stocking shelves, helping customers, learning about products, cleaning up. The same things your grandfather and I did when we started Henderson Family Hardware. Michael's eyes lit up with genuine enthusiasm. That sounds great. When can I start? As we continued talking, I realized that my decision to start over at 72 had created opportunities not just for me, but for the next generation. Michael would learn about business not just from textbooks or theories, but from hands-on experience in an environment that valued both innovation and wisdom. Later that evening, as I was getting ready for bed, I looked at myself in the mirror and saw someone I hadn't seen in years. A woman who was confident in her abilities, excited about her future, and proud of what she'd accomplished. Sarah's Hardware and Home Solutions had become more than just a business. It was proof that age didn't have to mean irrelevance, that experience was valuable, and that it was never too late to start over and build something meaningful. I thought about all the customers who'd thanked me for treating them with respect, all the problems we'd solved together, all the confidence we'd built in people who'd been made to feel incapable elsewhere. I thought about Maria and Jake, who came to work every day excited about what they were doing. I thought about the community that had embraced my store as an essential part of their neighborhood. Most of all, I thought about Frank and how proud he would have been to see what I'd built. Not just the business success, but the courage to start over when others said I was too old, the determination to prove that experience was valuable, and the wisdom to choose fulfillment over comfort. At 72, I discovered that the best years of my life weren't behind me. They were just beginning. And every day I walked into Sarah's Hardware and Home Solutions, I was reminded that age truly was just a number, and that dreams don't have expiration dates. The store continued to thrive, my relationship with my family healed and strengthened, and I found myself excited about the future in a way I hadn't been in years. I'd proven to myself, my family, and my community that being 72 didn't mean being obsolete. It meant being experienced, wise, and ready to take on new challenges with the confidence that only comes from decades of learning and growing. In the end, the family that said I was too old to manage had taught me the most valuable lesson of all, that the only person who gets to decide what I'm capable of is me.